So recording. So we're recording and putting them on a YouTube channel, and you sort it to look for the channel. You go to Google. Oh, that sounds on.
Okay.
You go to Google and or go to YouTube and go to the YouTube channel and put one word. And there's about 3 channels named one word, and you'll see which one is Scott's and Sunday School channel. And the purpose of that is to be able to, there we go. The purpose of that is to be able to, if you miss a class, to see it. But it's not that we are going to do something on.
We're not live streaming to YouTube.
Yeah, we're not live.
It's no substitute for getting to see you in person. If you can't be here, we make it available for you.
Last week, we left with a cliffhanger. We left in the middle or towards the end of chapter 25. This was the story of Nabal and Abigail. David and his men had helped Nabal's shepherds protect their flocks, and he had asked for some food and some provisions. Nabal said, "Who's David?" And said no. And David went crazy and decided, well, he was angry and he was going to go after them. Do you want to take it up from there?
Yeah, there's several things. We got some house cleaning. So one of the things last week, this guy's name is Nabal. And there's a point where, as we covered last week, he's not going to give David and his men any food. And he insults David, and David makes a decision, they're going to ride in and kill every man in his household. And the wife comes, Abigail comes, and brings David food and begs his forgiveness. And the thing came up, at one point she says, his name, Nabal, her husband, his name means foolish. And if you wonder why I would go back to that, one of the things that happens is people read and hear these Bible stories and they think to themselves, why would anyone name their son foolish? And some people then begin to think, well, this is kind of a myth. These are allegories. Nobody would name their son foolish. And it affects people's faith. Maybe not everyone, but some. So I went and did a deep dive on Nabal. There is another word. There's a word, Nabel, and the pronunciation is so similar. Nabal, that I can't even make the distinction. But I was trying to look for a way to explain to you that what she was doing, and my genius wife, Abigail, was saying her husband is acted foolishly. Even his name means foolish. And the fact is, it really doesn't. But what my wife said is, it would be like someone saying that she's always happy because her name is Mary, as in Merry Christmas. And it's exactly the example I was looking for. His name sounds just about like the Hebrew word that means foolish. It's a name.
But his parents didn't name him foolish.
His parents did not name him foolish. So if you think, if it bothers you, why would someone do that? Why would they name their child foolish? They didn't. And it's not just something that got written into a story for effect. The man's, and she was saying, look, even his name is foolish. He's a foolish man. And it's just, again, Merry Christmas. There's also a point where David has sent young men to Nabal, and they tell him, they speak for David. And they say, the whole time we were amongst your people out in the field, your shepherds, nothing went missing. And I told you, there are people who have said that, they're saying, well, we didn't steal anything. But later on, the leader of the shepherds comes to Abigail, and he explains that these men were a wall around us the whole time they were there. That's what and he said nothing went missing while they were nearby because they were a wall around us. It is very common in the Middle East at this time for if there's something left unattended, people are going to come and take it. There are raiders who that's all they do. And so these men were a wall. And it's kind of an interesting thing because I've mentioned before that in the Old Hebrew, the symbols for a brother is strong wall. And it's in the same context that these men were a wall around Nabal's shepherds. They were like brothers. That is implied in that meaning. And so he was saying they were good to us. They protected Nabal's flocks. He got richer because of these people, and now they're mad. Now he's insulted them. Everyone knows what he should have done was give them some food. They've earned it. So
we're going to take off. So then what happens is Abigail does what yours over there. What Abigail does is what Nabal should have done. She brings David the food, and we left it that David had accepted the food. And I'm on 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 35. You want me to read I'm going to read to the end of this chapter. Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, "Go home in peace. See, I have heeded your voice and granted your request." When Abigail returned to Nabal, there he was in the house, holding a feast fit for a king, in high spirits and very drunk. So she told him nothing until morning light. Do you want to comment on the fact that he was having a big feast?
Yeah, I had mentioned that shearing time is a big feast. It's a celebratory time. It is to ranchers what harvest time is to farmers, and it's customary that there's a lot of revelry. Nabal, in line with his character, is highly drunk. And she comes home and wisely waits until morning when he's sobered up to tell him what she's done.
And the amount of food that Abigail brought to David.
That's right. I meant to. Thank you. My wife is just a genius this week. So we read the description of all the food that Abigail brings to David. I mean, it's a lot. We don't have to go back. It's a lot. But what you see from that is that Nabal has storehouses. He has so much food put back that she can bring all of that and he won't even notice. And it reminded me so strongly of, and I had it printed, obviously, but of a scene in the New Testament where Jesus tells a parable, but he talks about a man who is so wealthy that all of his storehouses are overflowing, they're full. And he says, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to tear down my barns and build some bigger ones. And then I'll fill them up and I'll have so much stuff laid back that I'll eat, drink, and be merry for years. This is the same guy. It's not the same guy, but it's exactly the same thing. I've got so much stuff, I'm going to tear down my barns and build some bigger ones. It never occurs to him that your big barns are already full. Maybe you could share some of this. There's Nabal. And if you remember the parable, it says that this night your soul will be required of you. And then what are you going to do with all that stuff after you're dead? So here's Nabal. And if the next couple of those verses, you'll see he's real similar to that man.
In the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him about these events, and his heart failed within him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal dead.
Became like a stone. She tells him she's taken all this food to David. And I'm sure it's not just the food. I'm sure it is the insult that this woman has done what he said. He just finds it too much. become like a stone. Most people think that sounds an awful lot like a stroke. 10 days later, just like the parable of the rich man, Nabal is dead.
On hearing that Nabal was dead, David said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has upheld my cause against the reproach of Nabal and has restrained his servant from evil. For the Lord has brought the wickedness of Nabal down upon his own head." Then David sent word to Abigail, asking for her in marriage. When his servants came to Abigail at Carmel, they said, "David has sent us to take you as his wife." She rose, then bowed face down and said, "Here is your maidservant, ready to serve and to wash your feet of my Lord's servants." So Abigail hurried and got on a donkey, and attended by 5 of her maidens, she followed David's messengers and became his wife. David also had married Ahinoam of Jezreel, so she and Abigail were both his wives. But Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Palti, son of Lash, who was from Galem.
So, yeah, there's a lot going on there. There is this tendency with the Jews in the Old Testament, when one of their enemies gets brought down, to say, "Thank you, God, for vindicating me and giving them what they have coming." And I have this sort of built-in defense against that, because I'm always conscious of what I have coming. And I try and make it a point never to really rejoice when someone gets what they have coming, because it presumes that I don't deserve the same. But he does give thanks to God for preventing him from carrying out that violence on Nabal. He still gives credit to God for sending Abigail. It's God that prevented him from doing this bad thing. And that's in line with David. That's part of his character, part of the reason he's a man after God's own heart. And then after Nabal dies, very soon after Nabal dies, David sends messengers, servants, to Abigail requesting her hand in marriage. And it strikes us as a very odd thing. And maybe it is. Unlike Bathsheba, who we're going to see later, David had no intention of killing the husband so that he could take Abigail as a wife. But Abigail was wise. Abigail was watching out for her family, her husband's interest, when he wasn't doing it himself. And this one thing, I think, is probably one of the wisest things that David ever did, because he said, "You know what? If she'll look out, she looked out for me when I wasn't married to her and kept me on the straight and narrow. She looked out for Nabal. She's going to be a great wife." And he's right. And they did things differently. I don't know what to say. He already had one wife. Now he has 2. And actually he had 3. It's just that Saul gave that wife to another man. So that part of it's twisted. I got nothing. It's not, it is very uncomfortable for us. It's uncomfortable for me. But David's wisdom in wanting to take Abigail for a wife, it speaks highly of both of them. I think it was a good move.
As we go through first and second, yeah, yes.
I know it's old history, but it's not uncommon, whether you conquer or whether the guy dies, to take over his possessions. That sounded to me more like Saul than David. This woman's supposed to be beautiful, right? And so she comes up protecting or doing what Nabal should have done, according to her. If you read Nabal saying, "I'm already a rich man. I got 3,000 sheep and goats and all that sort of stuff, and people working for me." I don't know who called David to protect his ground. I mean, maybe he just felt, hey, I don't owe you anything. In fact, he says that. I don't need to give you anything. Who is this guy, son of Jesse? Very earthly reactions, not God inspired. It's very earthly. I see what I have is mine, nobody else's. David that gets pretty angry, also a very human reaction. You insulted me. Never mind my Lord, who's coming. Now he's going to bring in the Lord and thank him for
David admits he's done wrong. David knows he's wrong. But I tell you what, let's look, because I hear what you're saying. But first of all, David is running from Saul, and he settles down. And you're right, Nabal didn't hire him. One of the things I mentioned last week, though, is Jews within that they are a family, and they really would be expected to do that. And what Nabal should have seen, would have been expected to see, is this man did him a service and enriched him, and there's a person out here without food. And all David is asking for is food. He's not saying, I want you to give me some of those sheep that I enriched you with that you got to keep. He's saying, I just need food. And one of the things that makes the children of Israel, the children of the covenant within this different, is that they are supposed to do these sorts of things. They just are. Gene, it is expected. I understand it's human. And what Nabal does with these servants is he says, who is David? Who is this guy? Now, he knows who David is. Everybody in that nation knows who David is. But what he says is, who's David to me? He says, there are a lot of servants breaking away from their masters these days. And so what he's done is intentionally insult David and say that he's essentially a runaway slave. Now, what that tells you, though, the fact that he knows that he's broken off from Saul says he knows who David is.
And obviously from Abigail's speech.
That's true too. Everybody knew, but he admitted it in that because he brought up David's circumstance that he's broken off from his master. Right? This is the kind of political pretense that just always makes me so happy. He knows who David is, and he intentionally insults him. David flies off the handle. I'm going to kill him. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. David knew it later. And Abigail, he said, God sent her and prevented him from doing this very bad thing. So, it's all very human, but everybody involved knows better. And that's sort of the point. Here's Abigail as the one in the bunch who's the voice of reason. And sometimes we all need that. I know I do. I've had people, catch me and say, hey, what are you doing? Knock it off. And the rage subsides. And you go, my gosh, yeah, that's what's happened here. Nabal does it on purpose. And the other thing is it's stupid because David is a well-known military man and he's got 600 men with him. So Nabal is just dumb, but he's one of these people that thinks because he's powerful and rich that he can do it with no repercussions. Everybody in this thing is wrong except for Abigail. Let's go on to. So
chapter 26 and 27, which we hope to get to today, they're like a second tier of the movie. So chapter 26 is David spares Saul's life, part 2, because he did it once. And chapter 27 is David goes to Gath, part 2. So, and else you're reading. This is the difference, I think, from us studying all of David's life. If you were just listening to a sermon, you'd miss some of these nuances that, this is a second time at this. So do you want to read chapter 26?
Okay.
Or to start?
Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Is not David hiding in the hill of Haklah in Jeshimon?" So Saul, accompanied by 3,000 chosen men of Israel, went down to the wilderness of Ziph to search for David there. Saul camped beside the road at the hill of Haklah. I can't even say that. Hachilah.
If you can.
Opposite
That's why I'm having him
Jeshimon.
reading it. Sorry.
But David was living in the wilderness. When he realized that Saul had followed him there, David sent out spies to verify that Saul had arrived. Then David set out and went to the place where Saul had camped. He saw the place where Saul and Abner, son of Ner, the general of his army, had laid down. Saul was lying inside the inner circle of the camp with the troops camped around him. And David asked Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, "Who will go down with me to Saul in the camp?" Okay, real quick, I'll interrupt it. Saul is single-mindedly focused on finding David. The Ziphites, some other ones have said, "Hey, he's over here." Saul rides out, 3,000 of his best, 3,000 men, and he's after one man. And David gets wind of it and waits until they camp. And it says that Saul is in the center of the camp, which is kind of smart. You put the king in the middle. And he waits till, they start to bed down. And he goes to these two guys and says, "Who wants to go down to the camp with me?" One of them is his nephew. I got a couple of crazy nephews. If I said, do something like this, there are two of them that, "Oh yeah, let's go do it." So he knows them.
Are you going to read that line? Because it is interesting when he's talking about the two people. Have you read it about the two people that he's talking to go with him?
Abishai and Ahimelech.
So, and how does it describe Abishai though? It says he's the son of.
He is the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother. And we did the genealogy. It's his nephew.
Yeah.
And Joab later becomes important. These people are warriors. David only has two people. He doesn't go to all of his men and say, "Hey, who wants to ride down with me?" He goes to these two guys. He knows who they are. And and Abishai says, "Yeah, I'll go with you. Let's go down." And as evening comes on, unless somebody happens to recognize David or Abishai, they've got a chance at blending in. It's an odd thing to do. But I think I mentioned last week that when we were in Israel, it was sort of a rite of passage for a lot of young men to take off, go into Jordan, and go all the way down to Petra and get their picture get their picture taken at Petra to prove they were there, and then try and get out. And some of them got caught, some of them got killed, that sort of thing. But this is a pastime. And I guess David has in mind showing Saul up again. It seems that way. That night, David and Abishai came to the troops, and Saul was lying there asleep in the inner circle of the camp with his spear stuck in the ground by his head. Saul loves his spear. He throws it at people. And Abner and the troops were lying around him. Abishai said to David, "Today, God has delivered your enemy into your hand. Now, therefore, please let me thrust the spear through him into the ground with one stroke. I will not need to strike him a second time." But David said to Abishai, "Do not destroy him, for who can lift a hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" David added, "As surely as the Lord lives, the Lord himself will strike him down. Either this day will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Instead, take the spear and water jug by his head and let us go." So David took the spear and water jug by Saul's head, and they departed. No one saw them or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They all remained asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen on them. It's what it sounds like. I don't know much more to say about it.
But why didn't Saul recognize David the first time he saved his life? And said, I recognize you, I know you're the Lord's choice. So
That's a
why is-
good
Why is he after
point.
him again?
That's a good point, and it's one of the big things we're supposed to take from this. I've seen these sorts of things, a different flavor, the same ice cream, I always say. It's the, it's the little different circumstances, but I've seen people get obsessed. And Saul's problem is he's jealous, he's insecure. He knows deep down, he's been told his kingdom won't survive. And by now he knows David's the guy who's going to supplant him. And he is trying to prevent what he knows has to happen. And so there are times, and I hate to even say this, I'm going to, because some of you will recognize it. I don't know if any of you have ever received a phone call on Christmas Eve from someone, an old relative or friend, and they've been drinking a lot, and they say, I love you, I'm feeling bad, it's Christmas Eve.
I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry for everything. When Saul runs into David before, Saul knows, and he says that. He says, but he said before that, I'm not going to lift my hand against David. But he can't stand the fact that David's going to take his kingdom. We're supposed to see that. It's written in here. I mean, it's there for us to get. There's a point where David says, what if you come out into the desert after a flea? In fact, we're going to get it. After a flea, 3,000 guys for little old me. Saul's obsessed. Saul is ignoring the business of the kingship. It's expensive to take 3,000 men on the road.
He's not very good at it.
And he's not very good at it. But we also see, it says that God would not turn David over to him. But when kings are going to go fight wars, it's costly. And generally speaking, they have to have money to cover. They have to have money in the treasury or go borrow it. In later years, kings borrowed from the church to wage war, because the church at certain times had deep coffers and kings didn't have the money to fund a war, and they borrowed money from the church. So Saul doing this is in dereliction of the kingdom. It's a dumb thing, and we are supposed to see that. He is not running the kingdom, he's out chasing David. So,
And you also wonder on this one, the first time when David spared Saul's life, he was in the back, David was in the back of a cave, and Saul came in to relieve himself. And so this time David actually goes down to the camp, and you do have to think, so what was David thinking? And we don't know.
we don't know. We heard that come up a couple of times this week. I'd love to know what, yes, sir.
Back to what she was saying, jealousy and hatred causes a person to lose all sense of reality. They don't think rationally. I think we see that playing out. I don't want to get political, but we see that play out now. I remember I worked with a man back when Reagan was running for office. Remember there was a thing going on with Iran at the time, and the hostages were there and all that. And remember that it was Ayatollah Khomeini. Well, the man I worked with said before he would vote for Reagan, he would vote for the Ayatollah if he was running. And honestly, he meant it. He hated Reagan for whatever reason. As far as I could tell, he'd never done anything to him.
but hatred and jealousy both. Now, jealousy, I understand that because of what had gone on in my family. Jealousy and hatred both make you lose your sense of reality. I mean, you have no rational thinking. You can't see what's really going on with you. And I think that's where Saul was. He hated David so much, it didn't matter how good David was to him. None of that mattered in his mind. The hatred just took over.
And let's pull three back down. Yep, the hatred, the jealousy is a big thing. And that's, we do see, Mindy's right, we see a point where Saul acts, he seems like his conscience has gotten to him. But every time he thinks about David, I'm sure he gets mad. We see these things play out. So
now how do we know, what was the cause of this hatred?
the cause of the hatred,
Forgot.
and Marge is asking because, and the cause of the hatred we talked about was that he's told by Samuel that his kingdom isn't going to survive. And it doesn't mean he won't be a king. It means his lineage won't survive, and that God has had him anoint someone else to be the king. And then the really big one is when they come back into town after battle, and the young girls come out and they're singing, and they've got this little thing they sing that says that Saul has slain his thousands, David has slain his 10,000s. And I'm sure that's in there for a reason. It comes up several times. This really, as they say, sticks in Saul's craw. The idea that he's the king, but David, they're saying, is greater than him. So let's, no, that's fine. That's good. That's exactly what we're supposed to see.
But isn't it even deeper than just jealousy and hatred? It is the failure to receive the anointment, understanding what being anointed means. And that it's not your kingdom, Saul, it's God's kingdom.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's not getting God's message, but he's not getting God's message when he's jealous. I don't know what to say. It comes down to his pride and his selfishness and his willingness to ignore God. But that's what got him in that shape to begin with, was he didn't follow God's direction. Samuel was there to, and we're going to see that tie back in. Samuel was there to guide him, and he ignored it. So
Saul, as far as I can tell, Saul never has the fear of God. He never recognizes God as sovereign. He thinks of himself as.
he does. Saul, he struggles with that. He's the king and doesn't recognize his relationship to God and his obligation. Oh, heck, let's just break down. David is out there. Why did David think he could do this and get away? All right, that comes up a lot. Let's just go down the rabbit hole. When we were in Israel, we had a company trip out into the desert near Masada, probably not too far from where this is. And we went out and they gave a walking tour to all of us on the bus. And I stayed and went up the hill to take pictures. There was rain in the desert in the distance, and I went to take pictures, and they had given us instructions, and they were in Hebrew, and I didn't have enough Hebrew to understand them. And so I went up on the hill, and I'm taking pictures, and then I came down, and the buses are gone, and the people are gone, and I'm out in the middle of the desert, the wilderness, by myself. And
And it, I mean, it is, there's like no, you guys, it is just, it's a desert. I mean, with hills and it's anyhow.
big rocks and pits and stuff.
I'm with him, but I'm not with him.
They've
'cause
gone off, they've gone off,
Very well.
they've gone off, and the
Buses, there's two.
buses have gone to meet them and take them somewhere else. Okay? And the people it begins to get dark, and the people notice Scott's gone. And then they begin to, and so anyway, they panic. Mary is in this place, and they panic, and they say he's gonna die out there in this wilderness. It's not a good place to be after dark if you're not comfortable with it. And so they started sending out search parties. I figured out, heck, there's a road, it's gotta go somewhere. And so I just keep my feet on the road, and I'm using my flash, and every now and then I get a bit. But anyway, I got back. My point is this. This is a place that 3,000 men are not going to go charging across this desert wilderness, this rocky place at night. If David knows the way he came in and it was safe, and he has a way back out, he's got a good chance here. It's not, and I tell you all this because people think this all sounds so far-fetched. It's not. And it says then that God brought a sleep upon them because, and that must be in there because even they thought, it's kind of odd that nobody's waking up.
And
So
it's so dark. We just don't know darkness. It is so dark, you guys.
I think Marge is having some issues.
If
Yeah.
you're not going to disturb us at all,
Thank you.
not at all. Thank you, Jean, for noticing that. I am so sorry.
Yeah.
For not noticing.
I just hate to interrupt.
You're not.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Medications is back.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jean.
Okay. Thank you.
So I can make it for dinner today.
Okay. See you soon.
So keep Marge in your prayers. Marge and Ron, this is difficult. It says, the next verse says, then David crossed to the other side. And it doesn't say the other side of what, but we assume there's a ravine. There are lots of those. And it says he crossed to the other side and stood atop a mountain at a distance. So he gets safely out of the camp and he sets himself up in a place that it's going to be hard to follow. And it says there was a wide gulf between them. And David shouted to the troops and to Abner, the son of Ner, will you answer me, Abner? Who calls to the king, Abner said, which he's been called out by name, but he's there and he uses the authority of the king. And David said to Abner, you are a man, aren't you? And who in Israel is your equal? And let me say, Abner is a very bad man. He is tough. And it comes up in other Bible stories. Abner is someone you don't want to mess with.
In the next couple of weeks, we'll hear Abner again.
We'll hear about him again. He says, who in Israel is your equal? Why then did you not protect your lord the king when one of the people came to destroy him? This thing you have done is not good. As surely as the Lord lives, all of you deserve to die, since you did not protect your Lord, the Lord's Yahweh's anointed. Now look around. Where are the king's spear and water jug that were by his head? Then Saul recognized David's voice and asked, is that your voice, David, my son? This is what Mindy was saying. Now it's David, my son. It is my voice, my Lord and King, David said. And he continued, why is my Lord pursuing his servant? What have I done? What evil is in my hand? Now please, may my Lord the King hear the words of his servant. This is important. He says, if God has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if men have done it, may they be cursed in the presence of the Lord. For today they have driven me away from sharing in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. So do not let my blood fall on the ground to the ground far from the presence of the Lord. For the king of Israel has come out to look for a flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains. And I want to do this just in case. I really want to cover this. What David has said, if it's God who has made you angry at me, if you're following God's instructions, then may he accept an offering. May I be forgiven. Let me make this sacrifice to God so that he will forgive me and you won't have to chase me anymore. If it's God's doing, we have a way of dealing with that. Let God be the one to forgive me, and then we can be friends again. But if it's men who've been whispering in your ear, may God have, what does it say? I want to get it right. May the Lord repay every man for his unrighteousness and faithfulness. The point is, may God deal harshly with them. Now, David knows that it's not God. This is one of those times. This is one of those, we've talked about others, when Abraham wants to get a place to bury his wife, Sarah. There's this exchange that goes on. And if you've been in the classes, I've talked about it, where Abraham says, I want to buy the cave. And the guy who owns the cave says, no, I'll give it to you. And Abraham says, no, I insist. No, it's really, you're too important. It's yours. And then Abraham says, just tell me how much and I'll pay it. And the guy gives him a price, 500 shekels of silver or something. Abraham overpaid for that cave. He was always going to overpay for that cave. It was a dance. Everyone understood it. Everyone who was there. And in this case, everyone within earshot knows, and David's doing it to make the point, you're not following God. This isn't God leading you to come out in the wilderness chasing a flea. This is you, and it's men whispering in your ear saying David's trying to harm you. And he says, these people who are doing this, who are stirring you up, this day they have driven me away from sharing in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. In other words, I'm being driven out of Israel, the land of, we all have a share, we all have an inheritance. And in this place, we worship, we serve Yahweh. And what you're doing, Saul, you need to understand, by driving me out of Israel, you're forcing me into a place where they worship these pagan gods. You're driving me out of the inheritance. And he makes this case, the king of Israel has come out to look for a flea. Then Saul replied, I have sinned. Come back, David, my son. I will never harm you again, because today you considered my life precious. I have played the fool and have committed a grave error. And here's Saul again. This is his phone call home on Christmas Eve. I've been wrong. I've wronged you. He's done it before. He'll do it again. And David, in response, he just says, here is the king's spear. Let one of the young men come over and get it. May the Lord repay every man for his righteousness and faithfulness. For the Lord, and that's him. He's the only one, he's saying, that has acted righteously and faithful that day. He's really saying, may the Lord bless me for being so good to you. It's not there, but that's what he's saying. You've been unrighteous and unfaithful. I haven't. For the Lord delivered you into my hand today, but I would not stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and rescue me from all trouble. So he's sort of blessing himself. It's part of the form. But the point he is making, he's shown up the king. I've got your spear. I've got your water jug. I was right there with you. And you've got to send a boy out to retrieve your stuff. I'm not coming back just because you said so. I'm going to leave the stuff here, send somebody. But he makes a point of showing everybody what Saul has done. And then Saul says to him, may you be blessed, David, my son. You will accomplish great things and will surely prevail. So David went on his way and Saul returned home. Do we have any more time?
We do.
It's interesting that Jonathan doesn't appear in this, part.
That's a good point. It really is.
It's shown up at the other instances where, David and Saul have had interactions.
Mary made a kind of an issue out of the fact that even though Saul has, made covenants with David, he's still serving, he's still serving Saul. He doesn't really have a choice. I mean, he has come to David and said, you're going to take over as king. I'll be your second in command. But you're right, he doesn't appear. We don't know why, but it is interesting. But he's not going to go head to head with his father, the king.
Chapter 27 is David goes to Gath, part 2. So remember, last time he went to Gath, Gath is where King Achish is ahead of. It's part of the Philistines. The Philistines are a group of 5 cities that congregate together, and one of the cities is Gath. Of the 5 cities the Philistines have, King Achish is the head of this group of 5 cities. This is where Goliath was from. And the last time he went by himself, and and the only way he escaped was he acted like a madman. So this time he's going back to Gath, but he's going with 600 men. Do you want to read this one? We
only have time to get started, but there's a point that ties in the last chapter we should make.
Go ahead.
David, however, said to himself, one of these days now, I will be swept away by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than to escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will stop searching for me all over Israel, and I will slip out of his hand. And to understand that, remember, there are no chapter markers in the original. It's not really a new chapter. This is a continuation of what's just happened. And David has allowed Saul to live. And what this is, in its own way, this is sort of buyer's remorse. I let him live, but now he's going to kill me. I should have killed him. I should have, because now he's going to kill me. God has taken care of him all of this time. And yet he's at this point where he goes, the guy just won't quit. Sooner or later, he's going to kill me. And so what is that presuming? And we are supposed to see this. It's presuming that God will not protect him from Saul. And if you remember, we just got through hearing David say that these men whispering in your ear, these people who are stirring you up against me, Saul, are driving me out of the land of my inheritance. And they're sending me into other lands where they worship pagan gods. They're saying, go somewhere else where they worship pagan gods. And the very next thing we see is David feeling sorry for himself, David getting scared and deciding to go off and live in a pagan land where they worship other gods.
This is not David's finest moment.
This is not David's finest moment. And as we get into it next week, you'll see that it's not. David set out with his 600 men and went to Achish, the son of Maoch, the king of Gath. David and his men settled in Gath with Achish. Each man had his family with him, and David had his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, the widow of Nabal. And when Saul learned that David had fled to Gath, he no longer searched for him. And That's what David hoped would happen. I mean, I guess to that extent, he's right. David's not gonna ride, Saul's not gonna ride into the land of the Philistines to pursue him.
Some of the sermons we listened to this week on these chapters, saying this wasn't David's finest moment, that sometimes in our lives, when we decide, we've got this, we don't necessarily need to wait on God. We've got this. Things do, David would say, hey, I did the right thing. He's not chasing me anymore. And we do that same thing. We say, we got this, and something happens okay, and we say, see, we did get it.
Yeah, see, God led me on this because, and maybe they do come out, or maybe they come out for a short time. But as Mary mentioned, the first time David goes into the land of the Philistines, he's by himself. And this time he comes back with a tribe. This is the tribe of David. It's 600 men, their wives, their families, their possessions. And a king like Achish knows that David's on the outs with Saul. And this is a formidable force. And Achish lets him stay because he's an outlaw and because he has strength. This time is different. And
We have a few more minutes. Go
okay.
ahead.
David said to Achish, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me be assigned to a place in one of the outlying towns so I can live there. For why should your servant live in the royal city with you? Why should, you don't need me here with you. Let me live someplace. I mean, he at least is cunning. That day Achish gave him Ziklag, and to this day it still belongs to the kings of Judah. And the time that David lived in Philistine territory amounted to 1 year and 4 months. Now, let's save the rest for next time. But this place that he's in, if you got a map, you have a map?
I'm trying to see. I didn't open it up the right way. Let me see if I can get to it. No,
Let's do it next time. Do you have my pictures?
I do have your pictures.
All right, we're going to stop here, but I want to show you something. Last week, I told you about En-Gedi, one of the places that David goes. And I told you it's, I had them in, okay.
They look very.
It is
Mary.
Mary.
They're kids. Any of the other ones?
I do. Let me see if I can close. Oh, and they're not seeing it yet because I didn't share the screen. Shoot. Let me go back here. Go back here. Now, share screen. Okay. Can you do it from here?
Yeah, let me do it real quick.
Share screen. Hit that.
Well, we have
Okay.
this. So, En-Gedi. There we go. You can't really tell how high this is, but it is up on a mountainside, and what you see out there is the Dead Sea. There's a little plain along the edge of the Dead Sea, and then these hills, mountains, these rocks begin to crop up, and there's this little path in, and you're up, and you can sit there and look at the Dead Sea. You can look at what's down below you, and you're not really very visible. Let's see if this will, the player, it's not going to happen.
I don't think so. That's what I couldn't get it to do. You have to go to the next one.
Stick with me. Sorry, this part is. There is water up there, waterfalls.
And you have to understand, this is completely lush. I mean, it's funny because you see this and you say, well, it still looks pretty, still looks pretty deserty, but everything else is like the rocks with nothing green down below. It's dead.
And the really weird part is the water doesn't flow down the hillside. It goes underground, and there's no sign down below that this is up above. It's totally hidden. It's just the neatest place.
Oh, you don't see the pictures? Only the names of the pictures. Someone's writing me.
Oh, rats.
Huh. Does nobody see the pictures online? Jackie, can you see the pictures? No, she can't either. Huh. Stop sharing.
Stop sharing. I'll find another way to get this to you. The people here can, that's weird that you guys could see it and
Yeah.
most people can't. Okay, so anyway, there's this place up here, and there are waterfalls, there are pools, and I have pictures. There are wild goats. It's mentioned in there, the place, this rock of the wild goats. There's a thing up there called a rock hyrax. I don't know. It's this little hedge, I don't know how to describe him. It's like a big guinea pig, but a really big guinea pig. There are wild goats, there's water, there are plants, and it all sits up there and it's not visible from below. There's no water running down. It's a great place. I told you, I don't know why anybody would ever leave. If you found it, I don't know why you would leave. That's one of the places that David hid out. Maybe there's not enough food. You got to come down sooner or later.
So I'll send out today, I'll send out a couple of those pictures of Engedi, and I'll also send out a map. There's a map that shows, and when you get the map, look for Gath, because you know that's where David was. And then they do not to this day know where Ziklag is. That there's two places they think it is. So on the map, you'll see Ziklag 1 and Ziklag 2. But it is, he's asked to go pretty far south. And so he wants his own area.
The last thing I'll mention before we shut down is this Ziklag that Achish sends him to is south of where Achish is. And it's in an area that technically should have been part of Judah. It should have been part of the inheritance, and they never fully occupied it. And so David goes in, gets Ziklag, and it mentions from that day on, Ziklag is now a part of the nation of Israel. But he's down at the border of what's considered Israel, of Judah. And then a couple of these other Amalekites and a couple of these other people are down there. And he's far enough away from Achish that Achish can't keep up with him on a daily basis. We'll pick up next week.
Yes, and so the rest of 27 is interesting, and we'll explain it, but then 28 gets very strange. We'll warn you in advance.
Yeah, it starts to get strange, I
Yeah.
have to say. God be with Ron and Marge. Our heart breaks. I don't always understand why things are the way they are. They've served you. They're good and faithful servants. We know there's a point. We know there's a plan. We know that there's even a system, but they're suffering. Be with them today. It's a hard thing. We're all here together. We're all asking for some comfort. The doctors, surely you've made provision for that. Help them. As we study, help us to see the things that are important to you, the things that you want for us, the reason that the words are there for us, and to leave aside the things that we sort of interject. Be with us this week through the difficult times. Remind us that we're also part of your inheritance, and that we're called on to show hesed, to show generosity, to show mercy to the people who insult us. Let us take these lessons and use them in our own life. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. You guys can unmute yourself. Or unmute, but sure do enjoy. Okay, thank you. Well, I hope you have a wonderful birthday, Margaret.
Happy birthday, Margaret. I didn't need to say happy birthday.
Scott,
Yes,
Sonny's asking a question.
yes.
Where did the bus catch up with you?
Oh, I should have mentioned that. So they're all, one of the guys who was an officer in the IDF, and he wants to call out search planes, and they're all organizing to go out and look for me out in the wilderness.
And they're all bugging me, what is wrong with your husband?
And as they're pulling out of the parking lot in their Jeeps, I'm walking in from the road. I met them. They were all like, what are you doing? And you could tell they were very disappointed because they wanted to come rescue me. But I actually have pictures from that night because I'm using my flash every so often. And I thought, when they were so upset, I thought, would none of you have figured out to stay on the road? Would your first instinct have been to set out cross country to someplace you don't even know where the people are? I walked to the place where they were. There's a Bedouin tent restaurant out in the middle, and I walked down the road and I found them. They didn't even have to go out any place. So it had a happy ending.
But I'm sure glad you caught the bus.
Thank you, guys. You guys have a good Sunday afternoon. Bye-bye.
There's always,
Bye-bye.
there's always one on the bus.